Can we go ahead and start? Yeah. All right. So good morning. So today I'm going to talk about how to write an effective research proposal, and these are just some observations from my own experience over the last 20 plus years that I've been doing this, and plus some observations that have been pointed out by NSF program directors with whom I have interacted and whose presentations on this topic I have attended in the past. This is the research proposal. This is an important component of being our responsibility of being a faculty. And in fact, in the US, it's really important for faculty to write proposals and bring research funding in order to progress through their milestones, get promoted, and so on and so forth. And I assume the same is at least if not at the same degree, at least to some degree, it's true in every academic institution. So if you look at the process, there's a feedback loop, okay, where you have these 4 boxes as kind of inputs to the process to generate project ideas and then write the proposal, which you submit, you get feedback, and you repeat the process, okay, either for the same proposal or for future proposals. And so I'm going to talk about these components one by one in the following slides. But I just want to point out here that there are several factors that one has to consider. Okay, so one is career plan, ideas that we have, okay, and opportunities that may arise in terms of funding. Okay, all of these factors have to be considered when we come up with a particular idea that we want to propose. Once we have that idea, then it's very important to discuss it with colleagues. I'm going to get into that. Okay. Then, design, have a project design, okay? And once we have that, translate that into an actual proposal that will be submitted, okay? This proposal may be accepted or rejected, okay? Actually, it's, with NSF, which is the main funding source for many of the US academics, the rejection rate is much higher than the acceptance rate. So typically in computer science and engineering, the acceptance rate is in the order of 10 to 12%, okay? So it's much more likely for one to get negative feedback as opposed to positive feedback. But nevertheless, both types of feedback are important, okay, and then can be reconsidered when repeating the process in the future. So now I'm going to talk about this career planning part, and this is not just it's not applicable just to those of us who are already faculty and are trying to get funding, but it's also important for students when they make a decision on what kind of research to pursue, okay? And so it's in fact, it's kind of similar in the sense that for a student who decides to pursue a PhD, and so they're going to work on this particular subject for 3 or 4 years until they complete all the requirements for a PhD. It's similar because in the case of a faculty who is working on a research grant, which is 3 or 4 years, they still have to work on that, right? So the point here is that in both cases, it is very important that working on this project will allow you to make progress towards your career goals, okay? And it's important to set kind of, in 10 years, I really don't know what is going to happen, okay? Things change dramatically over a 10-year period. But in the short term, 3 to 5 years, I can have a handle on what I want to do, okay? But of course, that doesn't mean that you don't want to have a 10-year plan, okay? But obviously, that will be very less specific than a 3 to 5 year plan. So for instance, for a faculty member, a 10-year plan might be to, okay, I want to get promoted to full professor, right? Or I want to become an IEEE senior member or an IEEE fellow, okay? And so this is kind of a goal, all right? But then you have to kind of figure out what is the strategy that will take you to that goal. In terms of research, obviously, so you have to have the strategic plan, which is the milestones. Also, you have to look at your institutional expectations, okay? What does it take for someone to get promoted to associate or full professor in your department, okay? And similarly, what are the expectations for someone who is doing a PhD? What are the milestones that they have to achieve on the way to the PhD, all right? And then, does external funding contribute to that goal? So is it a requirement that faculty will have to bring in an amount of external funding to get promoted? In fact, in our university, it is a very strict requirement. We don't have a particular threshold. No one's going to tell you that unless you bring $1 million, you are not going to get promoted to associate professor. They will look at the overall picture, but if you bring $0, I can guarantee you, you will not get promoted to associate professor, okay? So, you know, one has to look into these institutional requirements. Now, you also need to talk to mentors. In our department, what we do is when a new faculty is hired, we immediately assign 2 mentors to that faculty. One mentor in the area, the specific research area where that faculty works, and then the second mentor can be in a different area, okay? And the point of doing that is, first of all, you know, to pass the institutional knowledge to the new faculty, right? So if new faculty arrives from the outside, does not really know about the processes and procedures that take place in our university, so we want to make sure that they understand all this as they make their career plans. And the second, of course, is to provide guidance. You know, if you've been there, you've done that, right? Then you can pass this knowledge down to your new colleague. Okay, and so typically the way that it works is that, you know, mentors will have lunch every month or so, and then if there are specific questions, obviously the new person can go and talk to their mentors directly. And during the evaluation process at the end of each year, the mentors will provide input because these are the ones who are supposed to know how that faculty has performed over the last year. Okay, so it's important, it's a two-way process, right? It's not only do new faculty learn from their mentors, but also mentors can act as advocates in the case of promotion and tenure and so on and so forth, okay? And so, and it's important to have a plan, because if you don't, what may happen is that you may just aimlessly target grant opportunities that do not necessarily advance your career goals, okay? So you might, for instance, so you know, I don't really know much about the overall funding process here. I have some ideas, but for instance, in the US, you have several types of funding available to you, okay? You can get seed funding from the university, so new faculty members who have not had any funding before, they can apply for these seed grants that provides little support for students maybe so that you can get started, okay, and formulate research ideas and submit to outside funding. Then you have basic research funding that comes from a National Science Foundation, and many academics rely on the National Science Foundation for their funding. And then you may have funding from private industry. Funding for private industry is relatively short-term and not in large amounts. And so faculty, but it's actually can be very helpful to a new faculty because you know, they can get their program started. On the other hand, obviously, industry is interested in their own specific goals, right? They want to solve specific problems, to advance their technology, create products, and so on. they are not interested, they don't have the faculty's best interest in mind, okay? So they will give you $50,000, $60,000 to get something done in 1 year. And so if that does not mesh well with your strategic goals, okay, it may be a problem, because now you're diverted from doing basic research that advances knowledge and contributes to your career, to actually solving small problems for the industry, right? So it may actually take you further from your goal, if that goal is to get promoted, become known in the research area, and so on. So it's very important. On the other hand, those of you who know about 80s rock and roll music, and you probably know John Bon Jovi, right? And so he basically said that map out your life, but do it in pencil, right? Again, that's the point, is that things change. So if you say, this is what I'm going to do over a 5 to 10 year period, as technology changes, directions shift and all that, you have to be flexible enough so that you can move to the new opportunities, okay? So career planning is important. So the point is, when you apply for funding, you have to do that with your strategic goals in mind, okay? And we all have ideas, okay? And so some of them are good, most of them are not necessarily good. I mean, it's from my own experience, okay? And so the question then is, which ones are the good ones that we have to pick, and which ones we may give it a pass, all right? So the first thing is think. And I recently, this is from my experience as well. Recently, I've started an administrative position. I'm the director of graduate programs in the departments. And so in the last 18 months or so that I've been working on, doing this, one of the main issues is that I don't have the time to think the way I did before that. Why? Because we have 700 students. Everyone will have a problem. Whenever they have a problem, they will come to the DGP to solve it, right? So I find myself spending a lot of time putting out fires, rather than sitting back and doing some more strategic thinking. What should I do? What are the interesting problems to address? So it's very important to reserve some time and just think. Okay. Of course, you also have to know the particular research area, right? So if you don't read papers, then you miss out on what other people are doing, or how the technology moves, okay, how the research moves, and so unless you read widely, it's going to be different to come up with ideas that are meaningful and have potential, okay? Of course, you have to talk to colleagues, attend seminars, and I understand that there's a lot of seminars that are going on in the department, so I think this is really gives you the opportunity to find out from well-known people, well-known researchers, what is going on in their worlds, okay? And don't hesitate to be ambitious, okay? So in other words, don't just say, look, let's define a small problem and see if I can tweak a couple of algorithms, existing algorithms, or come up with some small modifications to solve it, okay? That's fine, but the point is, if you really want to make a difference, if you want your ideas to make you well known, you have to think critically about and make some ambitious goals, okay? Here's an important problem. How can I solve it, okay? And then you have to figure out what is a good idea, right? So ask people who have gone through this process, who have had successful proposals, to share those with you. Your senior colleagues will be more than happy to do that, okay? And then you can see what is a good example, what will get you funding, what will get your, so what is a good research idea that actually gets funded, okay? And ask them to share the reviews as well. Similarly, volunteer to be a reviewer. And this is not just a reviewer for proposals, it's also a reviewer for a journal, for a conference. Be on the TPC and see the kind of work that others submit, okay? And then you can get a sense of, if you look at 10 papers or 10 proposals that are submitted, then you can develop your own ideas about what is a good proposal and what is not. You can figure out, what things work, what does not work, okay? So make sure that you get involved. I think this is a very important part, because if you're an isolated over here, right, then, and you don't really have a connection to what is going on in the research area that you are interested in, obviously that will, that will not be positive, okay? So keep that in mind. And then you have, okay, so again, we have a lot of ideas, right? Some ideas are good, okay? Now the question is, how do we select a particular idea? So what you may want to do is develop research themes that are your own choice, okay? In other words, if you are interested in networking, okay, don't try to submit to a solicitation that has to do with databases or machine learning, right? That's probably outside your area, and if you're not an expert, it's going to be difficult to get funded. But most importantly, okay, it must be something that you are interested in doing. If you're not enthusiastic about doing a particular line of research, that is not, that's going to solve, okay, eventually, and so that's going to be important. So, and so what I want to make a distinction here is that, especially in the US, and I'm not sure exactly how it is done here, is that you have unrestricted proposal opportunities and then targeted solicitation. So, so for instance, NSF has a program on networking research. This is completely unrestricted. You can submit proposals to that program, and can be on wireless, and could be on network security, it could be on network congestion control, it could be on optical networking, it could be on anything you want. It's completely unrestricted. And so then the program director will find, we'll talk about that in a moment, will find reviewers to review them, and they will make a selection based on the quality of the proposals rather than the particular theme, okay? So whether you have a wireless proposal or an optical networking proposal, it doesn't matter, okay? What matters is whether the one or the other is better quality, okay? It's not that the research area that matters. There are other specific solicitations that are targeted, and those, for instance, a few years ago, the NSF had created a program on future network design and then future network architectures. So if you were to submit a proposal on, improving Wi-Fi capability to that, obviously wouldn't be rejected right away, because it doesn't match the particular research theme that was identified in this particular targeted opportunity. So initially, okay, as you start building your career, I think the best way to go is to this type of unrestricted proposals, and I believe that some of the proposal opportunities that are available here are unrestricted, okay? That allows you to define research themes within your area expertise and within your particular interests, okay, and define a track record in that area. Once you have that, okay, you have a good track records on funding and developing the research theme, then you can search and see, okay, is there an opportunity that is close enough to what I'm doing, that is targeted? Then you can say, okay, yes, if I find such an opportunity, I'm going to try and pursue it, okay? But I think, at least for the relatively new researchers, this is the best way to go, okay? By the way, if you have any questions at any time, just let me know. I'd like to do this as interactive as possible as we go along, okay? No need to wait until the end for questions. And then you have to plan ahead, okay? Don't start working on a proposal 2 days before the deadline. It's not going to work, okay? Typically, it may take even months, at least weeks, but even months to get to the stage where you have a well-formulated, a well-written proposal by the time it's the deadline to submit, okay? So again, going back to how we do things in our department, new faculty come in sometime in the summer, and we encourage all our new faculty to submit proposals to the NSF Career Program. The Career Program is a program that is targeted to early career faculty. It's not targeted in the sense of a research theme, okay? It's targeted that you're only eligible if you are in the first 5 years of your academic career. It's very prestigious, very competitive. It's less than the 10-12% that I mentioned earlier. It's probably around the 7 to 8% funding rates for that program, okay? And because of that, it's very prestigious, okay? So what we ask our new faculty to do is, as soon as they come in, start thinking about a proposal, okay, a research theme, discuss it with their mentors, provide their mentors with the initial draft of ideas, and then update or ask them to review the almost final draft of the proposal, and then finalize and submit. Okay, so it usually takes months to get to that point. Okay, it's not even a matter of weeks; it's a matter of months. And I am glad to say that this has been a very successful approach. Pretty much every new faculty that we have hired over the last 15 or so years has received the career awards, and so right now we are one of the departments in the whole nation that has one of the highest, if not the highest, concentration of career award winners in our departments. Okay, so I don't know many other departments that are even close to us. Okay, the other thing is that there is an internal review and processing. So typically, our contracts office will say you have to submit the proposal at least 5 business days before the deadline. So and then there is a budget that has to be put together. So someone has to do the budget, and so it's not just 5 days; it's probably 2 weeks. So if the deadline is May 1st, if you don't have everything done by mid-April or a bit later than that, then you are out of luck. You're not gonna even get the contracts office to work on your proposal to have it ready by the deadline. So planning ahead is very important, okay? And so the idea is that you work in anticipation of opportunities. If you know that there's gonna be a deadline 2 months down the road, okay, start working right now. And typically with NSF, this is the case. So for each, the NSF networking program solicitation has a due date at the end of the year, so November, December time frame. So you don't wait until October to start working on a proposal. You start working probably around this time of the year to get the proposal ready by November or December. Okay, so this is very important. It's very similar to the way that we work with submission of papers, right? So if you want to submit to the Infocom conference and you know that the Infocom conference has a deadline of the end of July, then you should start working on a paper right now. Because if you wait until middle of July, you're not going to make it. Okay? All right. So how do I know whether this is a fundable idea, right? That's the important thing. So, is it original? And now, so how can you answer these questions? Okay, so is it original? Is it incremental? Is it interesting to others? Okay, will it result in a publishable paper? Okay, is it feasible? Does it fit your strategic plan? Okay, now the last part you can probably answer yourself, right? Assuming that you have put together a reasonable goal, 5 to 10 year goal, then the last question you can probably answer it yourself. But what about the others? Okay, So once you get experience, you can answer pretty much of these questions, right? Once you get experience and you have a really good understanding of the area in which you are working, you can have a good understanding because you know what others have published and what it needs to, or has been funded or published, okay? And so, for instance, you know, is it incremental if what you are proposing is just a tweak in a routing algorithm? Well, probably not, you know, very important to be funded. If you are proposing a radically different way of doing things, then yes, it's possible. Then the question is also whether it is feasible. Okay, so if it is very radically different, then you have to answer the question: will it be feasible? Okay, so the proposal has to address these issues. Okay, so the best way to answer this, especially if you are a new faculty, is discussion. Okay. Your colleagues will tell you whether this is interesting or not, right? So go and talk to the colleague next door who's working in a similar or area that is close to yours and say, okay, yeah, I have this idea. What do you think, okay? And assuming they are honest with you, which I believe they should be, okay, they will say, well, you know, this looks fine, but you know, 2 years ago I read this paper that had something similar. Okay, so maybe you know this is not something really of interest right now. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that today. I have to do this again. Just 1 second. Oh, no, it has to just, and now you have to, okay. All right, good. Thank you. All right, so the colleagues can tell you whether it's interesting. Your mentors, who probably have more experience than you, can tell you whether it is worthwhile, okay? Your supervisor will tell you, okay, yeah, this is a good use of your time, okay, go ahead and do it. Or, well, maybe that's not a good idea for what it is that you are doing now, okay. You may also talk to the program officer, and I'm going to talk about that. Now, things may be different here from the way that it is done in the US. So for typically in the US, whether it's an NSF or NIH for the National Institutes of Health or a DARPA, which is the Defense Agency proposal, every solicitation will have what we call a program director, okay? And the program director is the one who has put together the solicitation and who will ultimately select reviewers to review the proposals that she or he receives. And in this case, so if there is a program officer for the solicitation that you are targeting, then it may be a good idea to call them up and discuss. Okay, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. Of course, if there is no program officer, then probably there is no point of doing that. But definitely there must be someone who's making the last selection, right? So maybe you can find that person and talk to that person and see whether this is something that they would be interested in supporting. All right, so we've talked about this. So let's talk a bit about the project idea and how to develop it into a project design. Okay, so you have to review the literature. That goes without saying, right? You can propose something that another group tackled 5 years ago. That's definitely going to mean that your proposal is going to be rejected. Okay, the reviewers. So the program manager or program director will select reviewers who have expertise in the area of the proposal, okay? They're not going to give it to random reviewers. So you can be certain that these reviewers have a good understanding of the state of the art. So unless you your proposal discusses the state of the art and shows how it will improve the state of the art, then you're starting with the wrong foot, okay? So you have to convince the reviewers that you know what you're doing, okay? You know the work, and you know how to improve it, the work that has already been done, and how to improve it. The second thing that's very critical is to formulate the hypothesis, okay? And the hypothesis is basically the central part to your proposal. So for instance, for those of you who attended my talk 3 days ago that I talked about the routing and spectrum assignment problem, okay? The main hypothesis in that proposal was something very simple. It was so there's been a lot of work on routing and spectrum assignment, okay? All of these works used algorithms in traditional network design, okay? And the results might be good, but there was no way for us to be able to characterize the quality of the results, okay? Because it's an NP-hard problem. So our hypothesis was very simple. If we use scheduling theory, then we can develop algorithms that are better than the ones that were developed using network design and would be easier to characterize. That's why I presented a range of algorithms that were approximation algorithms, right? Approximation algorithms, I know I can characterize the worst case scenario, right? The worst case, I'm not gonna be more than 50% or 100% from the optimal solution. With network design techniques, it was not possible to do that, okay? So that was the main hypothesis that we made, was that if we use scheduling theory, then we can get better results than using traditional network design, okay? And so that's really the hypothesis, okay? And so it's important to focus on a high impact idea, okay? Not 10 hypotheses in small parts, okay? Small problems to be addressed, but one high impact idea. And that was our hypothesis, I said, okay? Scheduling versus network design, okay? Does it work better? So that was really the idea here, okay? Now, many proposals require collaboration, okay? In fact, in most US agencies, single PI stands for principal investigator, so single investigator proposals are only funded up to $500,000, okay? If you want to get a substantial funding above that, you have to develop collaborative proposals with colleagues from other departments and generally from other universities, okay? And so, you know, if you go to higher amounts, there's, you know, proposals with higher amounts, then there is a specific requirement for collaborators. So now, if you need to have collaborators, that makes the efforts of you know, defining the project and writing the proposal exponentially more difficult, right? Because you have to collaborate with all the other folks. So it's important to start the process even earlier than that, because you're gonna, typically the colleagues will be in another institution. You will have to use remote communication tools to you know, talk to them and so on, and find times in their schedule. So it's very important that if there is a need for collaboration, you have to plan for that in advance, okay? So,
can I ask something?
Sure, absolutely. Right. No, so NSF only provides funds to US faculty, okay? So if in order to do your research, you claim that you need a resource from King Abdulaziz, for example, as a visitor, or a visiting researcher, sorry. Is this? Yeah, so the NSF has specific programs. It has bilateral agreements with other countries, and I'm not sure if there is one with Saudi Arabia, okay? But I know for certain there's there are programs with European countries, with South Korea, with Japan, okay? And I've taken advantage of one such program with France. And what they do is they have the collaborators from the two countries apply to their own research agencies, okay? And if, but the only thing that they can ask for is for travel funds, so for one to visit the other,
yeah,
okay?
If, I mean, the French guy has an FP7 or a Horizon, why he needs money? That doesn't make sense.
No, I mean, if it is for the collaborative part, so France will have its own budget for collaboration. So FP7 is within Europe, right? So it doesn't, yeah, it doesn't fund, let's say, it won't fund me to work on an FP. I'm sorry?
You're a consultant.
Oh, for a consultant, right?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So no, the U.S. will not. So U.S. has very strict restrictions on how to pay, nationals of other countries. Okay. So I mean, for me, for instance, I had a visitor that I wanted to bring in and pay them a modest honorarium for giving a talk. It took us 3 months to figure out the way to do it, and we were not able to do that. Okay, so I promised him a small honorarium. I ended up, it's okay if you pay the some of the travel expenses and all that, but you can't really pay as a consultant. It's impossible to do. I don't know about the European FP7 framework and whether they can fund non-European consultants. I'm sure they can fund European consultants, but non-European consultants, I don't know.
No, it's different. It's very simple, really.
Okay.
What you do, you basically the universities have a consultancy. So they can bring as a contractor anybody from anywhere in the world.
Oh, okay.
So you're under the consultancy of that.
Right.
That consultancy is European consultancy.
I see.
So basically you give the European consultancy that brings this.
I'm not aware of any way that you can do that with NSF or NIH or DARPA. Okay.
Have like visiting programs.
Right. The visiting programs exist.
Yes.
So as I said, a colleague from France will apply to their French agency under the bilateral program. I would apply to the NSF, and if the proposals get funded, then we get funds from our respective agencies to travel to the other country for a short period of time. So these types of programs certainly exist, but this is not for actually paying salary. This is only for travel funding, okay? So that's now, I don't know if there is a bilateral agreement with Saudi Arabia. This is something that I would need to find out, okay? Okay. All right, now, so there are two important things that one has to pay attention to, okay? One is the rules and deadlines for submission. That's one thing, okay? And these are typically stated very clearly in the solicitation, okay? And so these have to be followed very strictly. So for instance, for the KU proposals that we have submitted, there is a specific format, and you have to put items in that specific format, and you have to put together the budget in that specific format, and so on, okay? This doesn't talk about the content of the proposal, okay? This only talks about, how to put together the budget, how to submit, how to organize the proposal and all that, okay? So what you want to make sure is that you follow the rules exactly, because you don't want your proposal to be rejected because it missed one particular simple rule here or there, okay? And then, you can consult the website. This is relatively easy to do, okay, to address. Just, okay, here are the rules, make sure that you follow them, okay? That's not an important part. Let me put that back. This is a very important part, okay, but it's easy to satisfy, okay? NSF actually has started, May 1st, they're starting a new check. If you submit a proposal, it will automatically check it for compliance with these rules. If not, it will return it to you directly. It will not send it to the program officer any longer. Okay, so they are very strict about that. The other thing that you have to look at is the valuation criteria, okay? And this will depend on the solicitation, okay? So it is very important. Now this has to do with the content of the proposal, okay? Not the format, the content of the proposal. So you have to make sure that whatever the project you propose to do, it aligns with this, and these criteria have to be addressed explicitly in the proposal. Okay, and in what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss the NSF merit criteria because these are the ones that I'm mostly familiar with. Okay, but this is true for any criteria out there. Specifically, for instance, one of the proposals we submitted, one of the specific criteria or a proposal we submitted here to KU was that at the end of the project there have to be 3 journal publications in indexed journals. Okay, so we had to address that specifically. That yes, we will produce 3 journal publications in indexed journals. Okay, if you don't do that, okay, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be an easy way for reviewers and the program officer to say no. Okay, I cannot really say that how you're going to meet this criterion, for instance. Okay, and so you want to make sure that these are addressed in the proposal itself. Okay. And in particular, as I'm going to mention in a moment, in particular, if you have an acceptance rate of 10 to 12%, as in NSF computer science, if you don't address these criteria, you are basically giving arguments to the reviewers to take your proposal into the 88 to 90% that will be rejected as opposed to the 10 or 12% that will be funded. Okay, you don't want to do that. All right, so there are 2 broad criteria for NSF. Okay, intellectual merit and broader impact, and each and every proposal has to address this explicitly. Okay, so intellectual merit has to do with the strength of the technical part of the proposal. Okay, so does it advance knowledge? Does the investigator have the qualifications to carry out the proposed research? Okay, is it creative and original? Okay, is there a well described approach, research methodology and plan to carry out the research? Okay. And then does the institution or institutions, if it's a collaborative proposal, do they have resources appropriate to carry out this research? Okay, so if you're saying that I'm going to use this high-performance telescope and your university does not have a high-performance telescope, then that's going to be a problem, right? So typically for proposals that we submit in computer science, that's not generally an issue because most departments will have the high-performance computing and networking capabilities that are necessary. So typically that's all you need. You need maybe a small cluster of machines and you need good connectivity between them. So that is not a major issue. But if you're saying that you're going to use facilities outside the university and all that, then you have to show that you have access to those facilities. So for instance, with software-defined networking, right? If we submit a proposal that say we're going to use the Genie testbed, Genie is a nationwide testbed in a US virtualized network, then we have to show that we have a Genie access point in our department that we can use to access that national network. Okay, so most of the times this is not going to be an issue, but sometimes it may be. Okay, and then there's the broader impact. The broader impact says that once you carry, while you are carrying out the project, okay, what will be the impact not just to the discipline itself, okay, but also to society. So for instance, whenever you see human resources, that means people, okay? Will it develop human resources? Are you going to train masters or PhD students or undergraduate students, okay? Are you going, and not only train them in terms of the research part, but also the teaching part. So if you develop new algorithms, are you going to maybe develop components in your courses or even a new course that will be talking about these new techniques that you develop, okay? Diversity. I was actually talking with Dr. Iyad the other day. Here apparently in your department you have almost as many female students as male students, okay? Well, that's not the case in the US. So in US computer science, we probably have about 15 to 20% females in the whole student body, right? So NSF will look into whether you're going to take steps while you're carrying out the project to increase diversity in the workforce. Okay, are you going to try to attract female students, for instance, to computer science or to your specific area of research, who may then contribute to diversity in the workforce? Okay, will it enhance the academic infrastructure? Are you going to develop something, okay, that will improve the infrastructure of the university? So for instance, maybe you say, I'm going to build a test bed. Great. So if you build a test bed and then others have access to that test bed, that certainly contributes to that goal, okay? Does it benefit society, right? So maybe you can come up with a much better search engine that, takes over Google, and then you contribute to the society using that, by doing that. So it doesn't have to be a best search engine, right? It could be an algorithm that you publish on your web page and then 10,000 people download it because it is useful to their own work, okay? So maybe you develop a new simulation tool for your specific area of research, right? And then others find it useful, they download it, use it, and all that. So, for instance, if you develop such a tool, it's important, at least in the US, it's very important to keep count of how many times it has been downloaded. Then you can mention it in your next time you propose and say, okay, well, I developed that tool and it has 2,000 downloads, and so I expect that the new tool that I'm going to develop will also be useful, okay? So you can want to do that. And it has benefits beyond the immediate research field, right? So, okay, well, you developed a really new technique to detect the seismic signals from the ground, okay? And then that may contribute to finding oil in places that was not possible to find previously, right? So now obviously that has repercussions beyond your specific field, which is seismography, and makes it, has impacts on society overall, okay? Would make sense?
Sorry?
Yes?
You mentioned about the type of to publish into a specific journal. You mentioned about impact factor or something like that.
Yes, I don't know that yes, of course, you can include that, right? You can include the impact factor information. I think, are you referring specifically to the KAU requirements? Or, because in the US, we don't have any specific goals in terms of research. So the way that it works is that, you say, this is what I'm going to do, but you don't say, oh, and by the way, I'm going to produce 5 journal and 3 conference papers. That's not part of the proposal criteria. I mean, the reviewers will not look at that. But, okay, every year, so let's say I get a 3-year research grant from NSF. At the end of each year, I have to submit a report that says this is what I have accomplished over the previous 12 months. And then at the end of the grant, I have to give a comprehensive report. And there I have to mention how many PhD or master students or undergraduate students I got involved in the research, okay? I have to say, whether they are, minorities or not, okay? So they keep track of, if they're US students, international students, male, female, what the race is and all that, okay? I'm going to, if I've done anything that enhances the infrastructure, I have to include that. And, so if I build a software that others can download, I mention that. And, of course, the publications I publish in this journal or in this conference, this is what I have submitted, okay? So the program officer will take that into account in accepting or rejecting the report. And at the end of the funding period, the program officer will not come back to me and say, oh, you didn't publish a lot, okay? However, okay, that's the important thing. they will make, they will keep track of what I have done. And so the next time that I submit a proposal, right, if I claim that I'm going to do this, this, and this, right, they will say, well, we believe you because, yes, you published, the previous work that you've done, you've published appropriately. Or we don't believe you because you said you're going to do all these other things and then you didn't produce any publications, right? So it's not, it's slightly different, okay? It won't affect your current proposal, but it will certainly affect your future prospects if you don't deliver, okay?
Sorry.
Yes.
So the aim of the project is to advance research, not to produce paper.
Correct.
It's not the sole aim of
It's not, yes.
the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of this. It's all of this, right? So you have to train students. You have
Promote
to.
research, promote the
Yeah. Right, yes. But again, ultimately, as I said, we're all judged by our publications, right? So if you really made good contributions, that will be, one way to determine whether you made good contributions or not is whether you've published. Okay, so because if I make the best discovery, but I never publish it, then it won't have any of this, won't benefit society and so on. So
maybe it can be a patent, for example, maybe in mechanical engineering, it could be a product.
yeah, no, absolutely. So that's what I'm saying. So a patent is a publication, and that actually counts as a publication. If it is a product, no, don't do that again. Yeah, okay. If it is a product, right, then it may benefit society or outside your specific.
Publication is just one of the.
Exactly. Publication is one of the ways that you can determine whether the project was successful or not. Yes, exactly. So it's not just publications. That's why they don't emphasize that. Okay. It could be that you wrote a book. It could be that you created a workshop in this area and you invited the most important people to make presentations in that workshop. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can satisfy these beyond just publications. And in fact, they don't want to see just publications, right? Because if you just stay in your office and the only thing that you do is write papers, okay, that does not necessarily translate to benefit the society. They want you to go out and do outreach activities, talk to the researchers, your community of research, and so on. Any other questions? All right. So, okay. So, you have to state the research goal and the objectives. These are kind of broad. Okay, and then you have to do this. State the hypothesis, like I said. Okay. And the research methods, okay? It's not just it's not enough to say that I'm going to see whether scheduling theory will be better than network design. You have to give a specific example of how scheduling theory can be applied there, okay? So that typically, okay, typically what happens is that you have to do some preliminary work before you actually submit the proposal, okay, to kind of test whether whatever you're proposing is viable in the first place, okay? And so typically a proposal will have a preliminary work that says, okay, this is what we propose, and by the way, we've already done the very first part of that, and the results are promising. Here's what we've already found, and the results look promising, so that encourages us to seek funding to perform the rest of these tasks. Okay. You have to have critical tests. Okay, how you are going to compare? How are you going to determine if your hypothesis is met or not? Okay. So basically, you have to convince the reviewers that you are confident that whatever you're proposing will be delivered eventually. Okay. And then, of course, this is very important. Some people do not realize that. You have to estimate how long it will take and how much it's going to cost. Okay, this is very important. And of course, if you need other people to, if I need a tool in another university or I need a collaborator and all that, you have to specify this, because then if you don't, the reviewers will figure out what the gaps are. I mean, most of the reviewers are already well versed, and I understand that. Now, yes?
If you're
Mhm.
Do you need to have some working prototype before submitting the proposal, or nobody cares?
So for instance, so typically, the reason you're going to build a system, right, is because you have an idea that an existing system does not support, for instance, or you have already started doing some development and you think that you can significantly expand what you've done. Okay, so you should either say, look, here's all the software that I know of, right, but it doesn't do what I want to do. Or you can say, look, I've built this very small piece of software, and look how promising it is. So I want to expand it to do this, 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 and this. Okay, so either way, you have to justify why you want to build the new system. Okay.
It may not be a very big research problem in that case. It's mainly possible that it's the way you build the system or present the results.
Right, right. So and then if it is not basic research, okay, then you have to find solicitations that target other aspects of academic work that is not necessarily basic research. And NSF has this type of solicitations, okay, so it has the basic research, and then it has solicitations that target the development of software tools, and this can be actually very large, because if you're developing a very sophisticated tool, then you need an army of developers, that you need to support for doing that. And so there's different types of solicitations. So it really depends. So the point is that you have to identify what is what it is that you want to do, and try to match it with the opportunities that exist. So if you're planning to build a better scheduler for an HPC system, unless there is a good amount of theoretical work that goes with that, it will probably not be funded by a basic research program. So you have to find a more appropriate program. Okay, but there's nothing to say that this cannot be done, right? So for instance, going back to a famous example, the first browser, Mosaic, okay, was funded by NSF at the University of Urbana-Champaign. Okay, it was basically the Tim Berners-Lee came up with HTML, right? And so someone looked at that, they liked it, they submitted a proposal and says, okay, I'm gonna write a software tool that will be able to show graphically what is the web page. And so they got funding to develop Mosaic. Okay, that's a software. It was not funded as a basic research because it was not basic research, right? But other ways to get funding. Yes.
Basically, I see a shift with a focus, at least in your view, on the Horizon project, for example. You see, they want something practical.
Mm-hmm.
They want ideally a product. So basically, ideally, your entry job will not be a paper.
Mm-hmm.
It will be a software tool, or it will be a robot,
Mm-hmm.
or it will be a drone, or it will
Sure.
be, and now. So, and actually, they tend to pay more money. Right now, I think they're the most prestigious project. Now, what's the problem? Unfortunately, more applied research, if you are, engaged in more applied research, like me, for example, and I'm at the college from here, it's really difficult to publish.
Yes.
So, can you give us any advice? Can you give any advice to the applied researchers?
Mm-hmm.
How can they sort of publish them?
Yes. So so the applied researchers. Well, I mean there's a lot of. So let me kind of address first the first part of what you said. So there's certainly been a shift towards more applied research. Okay. Fortunately, NSF has kept their basic research programs as well. So while the situation has moved towards more applied research, I think it's actually much better from a point of view of basic research than in the European Union, okay? Because in the European Union now they require consortia consisting of industry, and then the industry's interest, of course, is in products, not necessarily in publications, all right? So now, in terms of applied research, on the other hand, it turns out that if you look at journals, for instance, now they're more receptive to papers that discuss practical applications or implementations as opposed to just basic results. And in terms of conferences, there has been a proliferation of conferences. So for instance, if you're building tools, then you may want to try something like, there's probably lots of conferences on SDN tools or Usenix.
No,
Yeah.
Conference is no problem.
Right.
But unfortunately, most of the ASI journals, they don't prefer tools or practical applications. They still prefer the basic, theoretical, the traditional.
Right.
It's easier to publish.
Yeah.
Numbers, actually.
Right. So, I mean, I agree that if you're doing a lot of applied research, publishing in journals is more difficult. Publishing in conferences is not a problem. Yes. But publishing in journals, I agree, it is a problem. Okay, now, let me step back. Okay, this is unrelated to this. Okay, let me step back. So, we had the same problem with tenure requirements, promotion and tenure requirements with our college. Okay, we're in the college of engineering. Okay, and you get chemical engineers that publish 3-page papers and 15 of them per year, right? And then you have a computer scientist that publishes in SICOM or Infocom or one of the top conferences with the 10% acceptance rate. Okay, but they don't publish in journals. Okay, and so the issue will our faculty will get a high recommendation from our department, but then it goes to the college committee. The college committee sees the chemical engineer with 60 journal publications and sees our faculty with 3 journal publications in 3 years, in 6 years, whatever it is. And so there was a lot of discussion, how can I promote the computer science guy when, his productivity is certainly, 1/10 of the productivity of the chemical engineering guy, right? And so what we did is we specifically, when I talked to the dean, made a case that computer science and computer engineering is not the same as other engineering departments, okay? So it's not like physics or chemical engineering or any of these other disciplines where they publish very short papers in journals, okay? And now, actually, it's not a problem at all. It took us a long time to convince them, but right now, the last few years, there has been no problem. I mean, when they discuss the cases, because I've also served on the college committee, when they discuss the cases of computer scientists, they focus on the quality of the conference publications and the funding and not on journal publications, right? So I think what needs to be done is basically we need to educate the hires up, okay? Because they are not aware of the situation and they are comparing apples to oranges. You can't compare a computer scientist's publication record to a chemical engineer's or biologist. Yeah.
Like 4 impact factor for us is like, I don't think anybody, even if we're course educated, will not get it probably.
Right, yeah.
For a bioinformatics guy, 4 impact factor is considered fake journal. They're not even published there.
Right, yeah.
It should be 7, 8 published impact factor.
Yeah, so again, it took us a long time, but as I said, you need to educate the higher ups. Okay, that's computer science is definitely different. Okay, now having said that, our field is maturing. I mean, if you look at most of these fields, the way that it works like this is because they're mature fields. Computer science is relatively new. My guess is that 20, 30 years from now, computer science may be very similar. Okay, but at least for the time being, that's certainly not the case. All right. So yeah, we need to work on that as a community, that is, okay. All right, so I think that I mentioned about the program officer, and in the US it's a very well-established concept of a program officer that submits a solicitation. It may or may not be the case here, but typically if you're going to contact the program officer or whoever is actually making the decision, okay, typically you don't want to call them up. You want to send them an email, say, okay, I'd like to talk to you about this proposal that I'm developing, I'm planning to submit. I'd like to know your thoughts about it, then follow up with a phone call, okay? In fact, in the US, the program officers, that's part of their job, is talk to the PIs, talk to the investigators, and give them advice like that. And I've called them up many times, okay? So what they can do, okay, they can never say, oh, well, this is what you're proposing. Maybe if you don't propose this, but propose that, then they're never going to do that, okay? They're not going to get into the technical part of your research proposal. But they can tell you how to avoid problems, okay? And they can, tell you, give you some general guidelines that you can take into account. So, for instance, you can ask them, are you going to fund this? Well, it's not up to the program officer to fund it. It's on the reviewers, right? So it's so he can't tell you either yes or no. So rather, it's basically to have to ask more specific questions, rather reasonable questions, not specific. Can you fund this or not? Okay, and the important thing is, this is not the person to convince. Okay, this is, you can't convince them that they have to fund my research on routing and spectrum assignment. Instead, it's the opposite. I mean, you should try to understand what they have in mind and then tailor your proposal to address what they have in mind. Okay, so that's the important thing. All right, so proposal writing. So we've addressed most of this stuff. So let's look at proposal writing. Now, this is what I tell my students. Okay, I get my students. They have a problem. They work on the problem. They get good results. They come to me, they say, okay, I'm done. No, you're not done. If it took you 6 months to get the results, it's going to take another 6 months to actually put them in paper. They don't realize how difficult it is to do good technical writing. Good technical writing is not something that you get born with, okay? You get born to know how to do technical writing. It takes a lot of practice. It's an acquired skill. So it's very hard, and so the same goes with a proposal. Even if you have the best idea, right, putting it down on paper in a way that a reviewer will understand exactly what you mean to do is very hard, okay? So you have to have good construction, you have to do good organization, you have to make sure that you don't have typos, because typos turn me off completely. If I read the first paragraph and there are 5 typos, I will just say reject. I'm not going to read the rest of the proposal, right? Because if I can't, I mean, if you don't take the time to make sure that your proposal is well organized, why should I spend $300,000 or $500,000 on you, right? That kind of reflects on how you're actually going to do the work, right? So take the time to do it well. So for NSF, you have this format again. I'm talking about NSF because this is the one that I'm familiar with. You have to follow the specific format for the solicitation that you are targeting. So there's a summary, and summary you write it last, okay? You never write the summary first. First you write the description, then you write the summary. Then there's the references and biographical sketches. And this is kind of typical for most proposals formats, actually. So, you start with the goals, objectives, why it is important. You have to survey the state of the art. You don't have a lot of pages, okay? So you have to be concise, but at the same time, you want to convey to the reviewer that you know everything that has been done in this area, okay? Then you say, okay, what it is that you have done, okay? You have to establish that you've been successful in the past, and therefore it is likely that you're going to be successful in the future, okay? And then you have to describe your research approach. This is the hypothesis and the tests to determine whether they are met or not. How the experimental approach will relate to the objectives, and then why did you choose this particular methodology? Why did you choose scheduling versus queuing theory? Okay, you have to explain, and then you have to have a detailed work plan. This is important, and I know that KAU proposals also have a work plan. So this has to accurately reflect the efforts to the time needed and to the appropriate personnel, okay? And then the concluding statements, of course, just like a kind of a paper, the way that you write a paper, but now it's not that you're not providing a complete solution, right? You are saying, this is what I want to do. Okay, that's the difference between a paper and a proposal. So the structure is similar, but the objective is different, right? The goal is broad, okay, and it's probably what you want to be able to do, okay. So to put it in other words, you want to find an area that so this is kind of the my goal is to address some problems in routing and spectrum assignments. Okay, that's too broad. Okay, that's what does that mean? Then you say, okay, within that area, this is the specific themes that I'm going to address, the specific objectives. Okay, so these are more limited in scope. I want to develop better algorithms based on scheduling for this problem in RSA. Okay, so this is what you want to do. And you have to make sure that this is achievable in the periods, okay? Sometimes people will underestimate what is needed. All right, so typically funds are provided on the basis of merit, not need. You can say, I don't have any funding, will you please support me? Well, that's not going to cut it, right? Unless what you provide is innovative, okay, not cuts up, okay? If someone worked on that 2 years ago, the reviewers will know about it, okay? As I mentioned earlier, if you've already done preliminary work, that's beneficial, okay? Because that shows that you know how to do this, and hopefully the results are supportive of the merit of this approach, okay? The specific requirements of the solicitation is very important. You have to meet those, okay? When you write a biosketch, one of the mistakes that people make is they have a generic biosketch and they include that in all the proposal. That's a big mistake because you have to show out of all the things that you've done in your career, you have to show the ones that are most related to this particular proposal, okay? So if I'm doing work on RSA, but the only thing that I put in my proposal my biosketch is my recent work on future network architectures, that doesn't establish that I'm an expert in this area, okay? And in particular, and I can provide those slides. There's a lot of guidelines from NSF itself, okay, that you can follow up on. Now, this is written for the reviewers, okay? And the unfortunate thing here is that you don't really know the background of the reviewer in the first place, okay? So there may be a reviewer who is really an expert in exactly what you're proposing, or maybe a reviewer whose interests are tangential to what you're proposing. So it may not know everything, okay? So the problem, of course, is that these reviewers may see things a little different, or they may not understand exactly what it is that you are proposing. So it is very important that you take that into account and try to address different points of view, okay? So why would anyone have objections to what you are doing? And the objections can come from different points of view, so you want to be able to address that. So the reviewers first, and the program officer secondarily, okay? So you need to make sure that you provide all the information that they need, okay? Because if the reviewer cannot find a concrete hypothesis and a research methodology, they're not going to reread your proposal 3 times, to find this, right? So unless you've made it explicit and say, okay, this is my first hypothesis, this is my second hypothesis. For this one, this is the research methodology I'm going to use. So you have to explicitly state that, okay? So generally, those things that are and then the published requirements and so on. If you are a new investigator, there are some programs that are targeting new investigators, like career proposals, right? Career proposals that I mentioned earlier. These are targeted to new investigators, so you have to explicitly say why you are eligible for that, okay? So, that's the kind of some advice here. Now, how are reviewers selected? Again, they have to be familiar with the fields, but in many cases, NSF at least allows you to suggest a list of reviewers, okay? So this is here. So the NSF allows you to submit a list of reviewers and may or may not select any one of those, okay? But what the NSF officer is going to do is going to look at your references and see who is working in the similar area, okay? So they're going to call some of those people to serve on the panel, all right? So be careful who to cite, all right? But, no, actually you have to cite the relevant work, so there is nothing you can do about that. But be careful because, if you say something, say, okay, well, you reference a work and say, okay, in this publication, they proposed a heuristic, but that heuristic has this, and these flaws, okay? Well, that person may actually be a reviewer, okay? So don't ever make negative arguments like that. So the better way to say that is say, okay, well, they proposed this heuristic that takes this approach. We believe that a better approach for this and that reason is to use a different methodology, okay? Don't criticize, okay? You don't want to do that, okay? And then, of course, conference attendees, all right? So, if I go to the ONDM conference, that's where lots of RSA papers are published. It's very likely that some of those attendees will, or authors of that conference may be there, okay? And it's very important, as I said, make yourself known, okay? Don't sit in your own silo, your own office, and without any connection to the outside world. That's going to hurt you, okay? If you are known, then chances are that, better chance. So everything else being equal, right? It's better to be known than to be unknown, okay? Of course, if you are unknown, but you really write an excellent proposal, that should not matter. But we are all human, as you know, okay? So, all right, so these are the things. You have to convince them you're qualified, you have a good idea, and you have developed a good approach. All three are important, okay? Don't make mistakes. As I said, with an acceptance rate of 10%, a reviewer will say, okay, here's 2 mistakes, I'll reject, okay? If I have 10% of the proposals that at least don't have any mistakes, right? Then I'm going to consider those for funding as opposed to this one that has obvious mistakes, okay? Avoid generality. Generality is, so we are going to use tools from scheduling theory. Okay, scheduling theory is 60 years old. Which specific tools are you going to use? Okay, that doesn't tell me, saying that I'm going to use tools from scheduling theory doesn't really tell me anything, okay? I'm going to use this and these particular tools and maybe we investigate that other tool, okay? And why? Because we believe that, so this is how they are relevant to our problem. You have to state the results, and this is the important thing that I mentioned earlier, try to anticipate what the reviewer might think. You may write something and have something in mind when you're writing it, right? But how will the reviewer that is not necessarily an expert in the area will take that? You have to anticipate that and try to address that, okay? This is a lot of some things that the reviewers, I've served on many NSF panels. In fact, next Thursday when I go back, I'm going to Washington, D.C. to serve on another panel on some proposals up to $2 million. So if I've already reviewed these proposals, right? And so you can see many make the mistake of having this type of flaws. So poor organization, right? If you don't organize it well, it's a problem. If there's, as I said, ambiguity, if you don't have stated your hypothesis, okay? If you don't show that you understand the literature, the state of the art, that's a problem. So small budgets for ambitious projects, I'm gonna do all this, and I'm looking at this, I know how to do research, right? I have students, I know the rate at which they produce work. If you are telling, if I think that you need 5 students and 5 years to do this work, and you say you're gonna do it in 2 years with 3 students, I say, wait a minute, that's not possible, okay? You can't say, trust me, I will do that. You have to be specific, this is, okay? And if you say, oh, RSA is a very important research area, that's why you should fund me. well, that's not going to be good enough. It's your specific project that I'm going to fund, not research in RSA, right? So you have to tell me why what it is that you are proposing is important, not that the routing a spectrum assignment is important. So again, this is just a common criticism. Okay, so the too ambitious that I mentioned in a moment ago. You know, if you haven't done good work in the past and so on, so this is just some list, and I can provide, as I said, the slide, so you can. I'm running over time by much. So, all right. So then you have to have the project summary. That's important. Okay. This is what the program officer will read, right? A program officer will get 100 proposals. They're not going to read, 1,500 pages, which is the project description. That's what they're going to read. It's very important. Also, whenever this is, if this is accepted, and then they, then they will announce it, they will only include the project summary. They're not going to include the whole project description, which is very important. Okay. So you have to address the goals and objectives, what the methodologies that you're going to use, what is you expect that you will contribute, okay, and how you will impact either the field or society broadly and so on, okay. And that's why you have to write it at the very end, because at that point you know exactly what you have put in the project description, then you can summarize that, extract it, and put it there. Budget, very important. You have to budget for your own time. Do not underestimate, okay? It's actually better to overestimate than underestimate. Why? Because if you overestimate, the program officer will come to you and say, yeah, you ask for 500K, but the only thing I have is 400K. Then you say, okay, fine, 400K, I'll take it, okay? But if you say, I only want 200K, right? But you really need 400K to do the work, then the program officer is not going to volunteer another 200K for you. It's going to say, sure, or worst case scenario, they're going to say, you can't do it with 200K, proposal rejected, okay? Or if it is accepted, then you have to do double the amount of work with the money that you've gotten, right? So it's better to overestimate rather than to underestimate, okay? There's probably rules about travel and things like that. That is both in terms of the sponsor and your institution, so you have to follow those, okay? Educational component, as I said, is very important for NSF proposals. I'm not sure whether that is the case for proposals you submit to KU or CACST and so on, okay? But there may be administrators who have done that before, and so you need to ask for their advice, especially if it's the first time that, or early on in your career. Let's see. Yeah, so it's very often that reviewers will say this is unrealistic, you can't do it, so forget it. All right. So this is another checklist. I think I've covered most of these things anyway, so I'm not going to spend more time here. Now, all right, so now you have everything, you submit. Don't take it badly if it is rejected, okay? It's more common than not to be rejected. So the point is that you have to learn of it. Look at the reviewer comments, okay? And this actually may provide a lot of help, and especially, so I'm not sure how the process is done here, but because I've been on many NSF panels, the way that NSF works is we try to filter. So if we see some comments that are very negative, we try to filter them and make sure that the reviewer revises the comments to address criticisms on the proposal as opposed to the investigator, okay? So we will basically try to provide constructive feedback as opposed to just criticism, which criticism is not helpful, right? If you say this is a really bad proposal, but you don't tell me why it is bad or how I can improve it, that doesn't help either NSF or the investigator, okay? So then you can look at this and see if you can revise, okay? And don't take it personally, okay? And don't argue with the program officer. Don't go back to the program officer and say, why did you fund my research? It's really great research. It's going to actually make you look bad. Okay? The best thing to do is call them up and see if they have to offer from the recollect the discussion during the panel and see if they have any additional feedback to provide you to help improve the proposal, rather than ask them to reconsider their decision. They're not going to reconsider the decision, that's for sure. Okay. And now, if the program officer calls you up and says they want to negotiate, that's good news. That means they have received good reviews of your proposal. Now they want to have you either address some of these or talk about the budget and see if you can do the same work with a bit less money and all that. So, so that's a good sign. Okay, so then you have to make sure that you follow through. So I remember a few years ago, I got an email from the program officer. I had submitted proposals. It was summer. I got an email from the program officer saying, I'd like to call you to discuss this proposal, right? And unfortunately, I was not in my office. I was in Sri Lanka, okay? But fortunately, I always check my email, because if I had waited for a week or 10 days before responding to the program officer, they might have moved on to the next person, right? This guy is not interested, so let's move on to the next proposal down the rank. And so I immediately responded and said, look, I can't call you now, but I'll be back in my office at the time, then we can meet, discuss that week. And that's how we did that. So, but it's important if you get such a call to immediately follow up, okay? And so, it's not actually, if you get funded, that's not the end, that's the beginning of the process, because now you get the funds and you have to actually do what you promised to deliver, okay? That's a big undertaking, okay? You have to get everything started right away. You have to look at, now you have other sorts of requirements that you have to fulfill, right? About reporting, about purchasing. I know here, for instance, that it takes some time for the funds to come and get to purchase things or hire things and so on, okay? And of course, you have to be especially aware of the research misconduct and plagiarism and so on, right? So if unethical conduct is obviously not acceptable in the research community, so you have to be careful about that. But the point is that, again, if you get funding, that's the beginning of the process. And now you have to start thinking ahead of what to do, how to publish, and so on. All right. So I'm terribly over time, so I'm sorry about that. But I'll stop here. I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. And as I said, I'll email all the slides to Dr. Iyad, and so he can make them available to all of you. All right. Any questions?
No mention about the visualization.
I'm sorry?
The visualized idea.
Plagiarism, yes. Yeah. Plagiarism is, yeah. So, I mean, there's plagiarism in two issues, right? So, there's a plagiarism, so if you steal somebody else's idea and submit it to the program officer, that will put you into a blacklist right away, okay? Because it's very unlikely that an idea that someone else has started will not be known to the reviewer. So that's different from plagiarism, where you actually copy somebody else's work and then you try to publish it in a journal, okay? But it's as serious as that, okay? So that's what I mean here, is that, you talk to a colleague and, okay, you thought that he had a great idea, and then you write a proposal essentially expanding on their idea. Well, and of course, if you run the experiments, this is the falsification. You run the experiments and you see that your approach actually is 50% worse than a current approach. So then you change the results and you change the lines and you say your approach is 50% better, right?
That's common in the US universities.
I don't think so. I mean, there are some instances of them, and they are actually fine. It may not be uncovered right away, But if it is in an area that is an area of active research, and then people will start implementing it, will say, okay, well, what's going on? You know, you said it's 50% better, it's actually 50% worse.
Especially in AI, actually.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, so the question is whether it is, you know, there's also the question whether it is intentional or not. But the point is, you cannot even trust your own students. I mean, you know, I never trust, you know, so you have to make sure that when you discuss with your student, they have to explain exactly what they are doing and make sure that you look carefully at their work. But yeah.
At your university, you have at your faculty some journal which is related to computer science and information technology and something like that.
What do you mean here, faculty? You mean faculty who are editors?
Yes. You have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Therefore, you have some agreement for the staff you have inside the faculty should be published inside this journal?
No. So no. So the submissions that, so even if a faculty is editor-in-chief in the journal, right? They do not make the decision of what to publish. The decision is, so there's an editor-in-chief and there's an editorial board, and it's the editors and the editorial board that actually handle papers. They will submit it to reviewers and they will make a decision. So the editor-in-chief doesn't actually handle any papers, okay? They just delegate that, and they make sure that their editorial board is composed of people who cover the various areas of their specific field of study and so on. But no, just, you know, I wouldn't want it to be that way, that just because I know that editor, then I can publish in that journal easier than other folks. No, that's not the case. Any questions from the girls section? Okay, you're welcome. Any other questions from the audience here? No?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.